Thank you so much for coming and helping us understand this important issue. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I want to tell you in the last 10 days I have been, 2 weeks, I have been to Humboldt County, California, which has a ballot just like we did here in the spring. I have been to Colorado to work with those people, and I just this last weekend attended a national conference about anti-GMO activism and what's going on, held in our own little Portland, Oregon. And I have seen the enemy, and it is ugly. It is very, very ugly. Do not get discouraged with what you are going to see and hear in the next 6 to 7 weeks. But I'm going to try to get through like 2 chapters in a book. The first chapter is going to be largely about just this campaign and why people might vote for or against it, what the issues are on both sides. If we have time, we'll get to chapter 2, which has about 4 paragraphs. And I don't think we'll get all the way through that, but don't worry. I'll save time to answer questions. Okay, why do Oregonians, why do Americans deserve the GMO Food Label? Here are some of the issues. Right now, labeling as contains genetic engineered ingredients is voluntary, and in this country, virtually no one does it. No industry does it. The rule is based on something that Congress passed in 1992, just at the embryonic stage of this technology, through the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And it said that in order for 2 related pieces of safe food to have separate labels, you have to be able to sense a difference, see a difference, smell a difference, feel a difference, etc., before they would have separate labels. Well, we usually cannot see or sense otherwise a difference between a genetically engineered cornflakes and a non. Okay? The difference is on the inside genetically. Let me give you an example of 2 closely related items. This is freshly caught Atlantic salmon, natural wild. No added coloring. This is what happens when it's grown, the same species is grown commercially, and they put a coloring material into the food. You know, you can ask yourself, gee, this looks great down here, and it does. But that's okay. These are not genetically engineered, neither one. But you see a difference, so they're labeled. Color added through feed. That's the requirement. You can see a difference. Same fish, Atlantic salmon, it has a gene from an eel-like fish and a gene from our Pacific salmon to make it grow faster day and night. And it grows about 3 times faster. So for the same age, the genetically engineered salmon will be 3 times heavier. Do you see a difference? Do you sense a difference? I do. Are they going to be labeled? No. There's 2 apples. Do you see a difference? The one on the right is genetically engineered by a process that will kill the activity of some genes. And it prevents this browning reaction to take place. You see a difference? Is the genetically engineered apple, Arctic apple, going to be labeled as genetically engineered? Very unlikely. Why does this kind of stuff happen to us? Okay. These are the countries in golden color that label their foods, genetically engineered foods. And the reason why I've got this in the next page, I list the countries. I've got this page to point out that places like Brazil, India, China, and Australia grow genetically engineered crops, and they label it. So there's not an exclusionary thing. The United States grows genetically engineered crops, but it's white because there's no label. So here's a list of the countries of the world, and the number one feedback, I'll get to this in an instant, you can't afford it. You can't afford to label your genetically engineered food. Does that sound familiar, like 15119 on the banning of crops? Our county citizens just can't afford it. Well, it's the same story here. And I lit up some of these names so they jump out at me. People of Bolivia, Ecuador, El Salvador, India, Indonesia, Kenya, Peru, Poland, etc. You think they'd scream out if their food prices went up? I think so. Have they complained? No. Okay, the Yes campaign will tell you this kind of stuff. We have a right to know what's in our food, so we can make our own decisions about what we eat. It's as simple as that. Don't try to read anything more into it. It's that simple. We have a right so we know what we'll feed ourselves and our families. If it's not labeled, how can we tell? 64 other countries I've just shown you have a label contains genetically modified materials. And that represents about 1/3 of the world, actually almost half of the world. But I reduced it because not all of the folks in India eat processed foods and the like where it says there's a label. So let's lower the number to about 1/3 of the world. And we're not included in that 1/3. Okay, GMOs have increased pesticide use by 400 to 500 billion pounds. So many of us think, maybe they're narcissists. That's a decision that you all are having. And fourthly, some people have a legitimate question whether GMO foods are safe outside of the issue of pesticides. Is there something going on uniquely about the genetic manipulation that maybe makes them safe? Now, bear in mind there is a whole host of reasons why people may want to vote in favor of a label. Some of them may be, let's say, frightened of the unknown, don't know really what these things are. Some may indeed be concerned with the pesticides, and there will be some among us that don't give a tinker's darn. They don't care. That's fine. That's okay. But I'm trying to just say we each ourselves have many, many different, sometimes unrelated reasons why we'd like to have a label. Issues against labeling. Labeling will increase costs around $400 to $500. I've heard that number in California. I've heard it in Colorado. I've heard it in Bend. I've heard it in Portland. They're all reading from the same script. And this script comes from a research study done by one person at one university, a very famous university, a reputable university called Cornell in New York, the state of New York. And in that article, the professor says, this is my opinion. And yes, my funding for this project was from Monsanto. And you have to give him credit. He admits that. He's the right kind of a person. How did he come to this conclusion? The industry likes to use these numbers because they come up with, we'll have to reformulate our foods. We're going to label GMO, contains GMO. People won't buy it. So we're going to have to put in organic foods. That's what you're going to buy is organic foods because there isn't enough of the non-GMO foods in the marketplace. So the organic will cost you more, hence $400 to $500 more a year. So it's not comparing apples with apples. It's comparing apples with automobiles. It's not a fair, right comparison. Yes, if the nation overnight wakes up, in my estimation wakes up, we're going to label. There will be a shortage of non-genetically engineered foods because 90+% of what's being grown in the Midwest, corn, soy, canola, cotton, cottonseed oil, sugar beets, 90–95%. That's what we got going. So it's going to be a consumer demand transitional process. It may take a couple of years to balance out. That's the truth. I like the whole team. Please remember that. Now, increases, a person by the name of David Byrne in 2001, illustrated. He was the Commissioner for Health and Consumer Protection in all of European nations. Said in 1997, labeling began and it did not result in increased costs despite double-digit cost increase predictions by some, and some is the industry. So this is a speech that he gave 4 years after labeling started in Europe. GMO-free now is our Cheerios and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It's not yet labeled, but they have gone GMO-free, and there's not been any price increase. Labeling issue is confusing and inconsistent, the industry says. Do you think the people in the 64 other countries, are they confused? Are they griping about the system? Do you think they have it figured out? Contains genetically engineered material? What's confusing about that? I don't know. We do label things now like homogenized milk, juice from concentrate, etc. Is that confusing for you? Labeling must be voluntary and it must be at the national level. I don't have a theoretical problem with that, but every time it's been attempted, and ask our representative Fazio from Eugene, he's introduced legislation and the industry lobbies like hard to kill it. And that's what happens to national attempts. Biotechnology lobbyists, as I said, have always blocked national attempts. Too many exemptions. Oh my God, you're not going to label meat. You're not going to label dairy, food you buy at a restaurant. It's not going to be labeled. Well, the reason why it is because the meat we buy, it's not genetically engineered. It's fed genetically engineered corn and soy, but that making, what you eat doesn't make it genetically engineered. So that's why these have been exempted. And it follows the trend where other labeling efforts in other states have been put forward to the people. That's what they do here. Seems logical to me. This slide lists some of the companies that don't want food labelings, and quickly across the top, DuPont, Syngenta, you remember from the spring, BASF, Monsanto, Coke, PepsiCo, all the same players are there. These are some of the players who are contributing these numbers of dollars to the campaign here in Oregon to kill Measure 92. And these numbers, I don't know what is $300,000-$400,000, doesn't include $1.8 million that Monsanto has already purchased, laid down on the table to buy TV ads. Lucky us, we got to look forward to in about a few weeks. On the other hand, there's more than 100 scientific and public health organizations that support labeling. American Public Health Association, American College of Physicians, British Medical Association, American Nurses Association, and about 95, 96 more other related organizations. A label is okay, and they are in favor of it in the United States. Let's go to maybe close to chapter 2 in this hypothetical book. And I want to share with you, there's many reasons, like I mentioned earlier, why we may have concerns with genetically modified organisms. And I've listed some of them here: labeling, farming practices, pesticides, weed resistance, insect resistances, and so on. And you don't want to hear all of that right now. So I picked about 3 different areas. So we're going to transition from the kind of the political campaign stuff into some of the reasons that I personally feel that it's important to label our foods as important. And it'll be environmental issues. for the most part. Having said that, let me say, what really bugs me about not having a label is when we do have a label.
Yeah.
And it says 100% natural on our vegetable oils, made from unnatural genetically modified seeds. 100% natural? Sorry, that's not what it is. This is where some of the genetically engineered materials line up. Junk foods, cereal, junk foods, making of ethanol. And here, folks, corn and soy going to our farm animals. And as I said, they're not going to be labeled as genetically engineered because they're just fed that food. Okay. The industry has collectively made a lot of promises about their technology. And virtually all of those promises have not been kept, in my estimation. And I guess in a weak moment, I would call them propaganda. And after a year, I'd probably say they're lies. So what about pesticide use? And that's one of the topics important. Now, pesticide is a family name, and it includes herbicides that kill weeds, includes insecticides that kill insects, includes nematicides that kill worms, and so on. So pesticide use has declined, says the industry. But this is the amount of Roundup that has been used on genetically engineered crops. And I was taught in the universities that I went to, when a line goes up, that means increase, and it hasn't changed. Increase, not decrease. The industry's told us, don't worry about glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. It quickly decomposes. Yeah, maybe if you're down in Texas, it takes 3 days where they studied it, or 50% of it disappeared. But in Iowa, in Pennsylvania, it takes 4 to 5 months. It all depends upon the microbial activity of the soil. Weed resistance, not a fun thing. For me, it's a scary thing. When you use the same weed killer, glyphosate, year after year after year after year, and pretty soon you double the spray concentration. Then you go from 1 spray to 2 spray. Then you go to a 3rd spray at the end of the season to knock down, desiccate your crop year after year. It's natural. Nature's way is at work in your field to select for those mutations that happen in the weeds to make them resistant to what you're going to try to kill them with. They become resistant to the spray. It's natural. It's predicted. Any biologist would step forward and say, yeah, it's going to be a problem. And it is a problem. 62 million some odd acres in the U.S. have serious weed-resistant problems. That's about the landmass area of the state of Oregon. Think about that in the Midwest, especially down to Atlanta, Georgia, and so on. So what are our farmers going to do about this crop that's not here? It's gone. It's wiped out. The green are the resistant shoots, by the way. The brown is what's succumbed to the spray. So you got to mix. So scientists who study the weed resistance issue say, hey, we've arrived now at the pesticide treadmill time. What does that mean? We have to start using other pesticides. So instead of just glyphosate, Roundup, that gets sprayed on our food, we need more chemicals. So the industry needs to sell our farmers new kinds of plants that will resist more chemicals. And you think those chemical companies have a conflict of interest? They're not seed companies. Don't fool yourself. They're chemical companies. Their income, yeah, is selling seeds, but the seeds have stuff on the inside that's genetically engineered, and it has stuff now on the outside of the seed. And the stuff are more chemicals. What incentive do you think an agricultural chemical company has and taking away a chemical. Let's sell our farmers something that's more friendly to the insects, the friendly insects of the world, to the frogs, to the birds, etc. Let's just volunteer to take away a couple of chemicals. You think they have an incentive to do that? You better believe it not. Because they have people who own stocks, and they want to see the stock price go up. That's the American way. They take away chemicals, they take away sales. Take away sales, their income goes down. There's no incentive to be kind to the gentler. No, just the opposite. To make more and more and more. So coming back to weed resistances, in 10% of the weeds on the farms, those weeds are resistant now up to 5 different chemicals. Yeah, it happens. It's not just glyphosate. It's all other kinds of chemicals, and it's getting worse. So industry is coming out with plants that are resistant to all of these other chemicals. I think you might recognize 2,4-D or dicam. Very controversial. And the latest info that I have, it says, Ray, that's going to be approved in our soybeans somewhere between a month and election time. Soybeans and corn. Something called isoxaflutol, you've not heard of that. EPA says that's a problem with carcinogen. It's going on not 5% of the crop as is allowed today, but if it's deregulated on soy and corn, it'll go on 100% of the acres. Maybe 40, 50, 60 million acres and get a probable carcinogen. Are you going to watch your grandchild eat this stuff? So you might then be an example of a person that would want to see a label for your grandchild. See, we all have different reasons for seeing a label. Dave, if you need to go, I fully understand. You warned me about that. We've got a little bit of a late start, but thank you for that. I appreciate it. In addition to weed resistances, we have now insect resistances. You know, these genetically engineered plants produce a toxin, soil bacteria. They produce a toxin that's intended to kill the insects that chew on the roots. And just like the herbicide Roundup, this has been used for 17 years, again and again and again, corn cycle after corn cycle after corn cycle, etc. And now there are about 5 or 6 states in the Midwest where there's serious insect resistance. Won't control it with the Bt toxin anymore. What are we going to do? The answer is more chemicals. Here's the resistance of insects increasing over time in the United States. While industry says, oh, we're using less insecticide, Ray says, what is this? What is this? What is this? That's the concentrate, or that's the amount of neonicotinoids, neos. Remember, those are chemicals that are coated on the seeds that are killing the pollinators. Does this look like it's going down in use? And the scary thing for me is insect resistances are still happening at a time when these chemicals are being used more and more and more. Are the insects also becoming resistant to these chemicals? Wow. Where do we go with this?
Thank you very much.
Please skip through a couple of slides and just say, coming back to the herbicide as an example, it's everywhere. You know that, right? You go to the Midwest in the summer, it's in the air, it's in the thunderstorm, it's in the creeks. Even when your granddaughter goes outside in a rainstorm, it comes down in the rain. And we learned this year that glyphosate, that active ingredient, is excreted in human urine of Americans. And in the breast milk of breastfeeding moms. And the industry in the past said it's safe, it's rapidly biodegraded, it won't contaminate our foods, it won't, of course, contaminate our bodies. Sure. Here's the concentration positives for glyphosate in human urine in the United States. Wherever there is a number is where there was a positive sample, about 30 to 40% of the Americans. But we have 10 times greater concentration in Americans compared to Europeans. 10 times greater? Why is that? Why would Americans have more glyphosate in our urine than in Europe? Nobody knows that answer. It's a rhetorical question. And I, being a smart aleck that I am, say, do you suppose it has something to do with the fact that they label their foods? I don't know. It occurs to me maybe it has something to do with that. Here's the positives on breast milk for glyphosate, about 10 times higher than in urine. Means it biologically concentrates in the body, like DDT, like PCBs. I don't want to get into this because I've used already a lot of time, but let me just skip again to another environmental issue. You buy corn seeds, or soy, or canola. They'll be colored like these. Pass those around. Those are genetically engineered corn seeds. And why are they colored maroon, pink, blue? And the answer is, that's a signal. Buyer beware. You've got some chemicals to deal with. If you're a farmer, you wear a respirator mask and gloves. And you load it into the hopper to plant it in the field. So the Bt toxin, the gene inside, and the other gene that makes for Roundup resistance, no longer is enough. You've got 4 or 5 neurotoxins coated on the outside. That means, like DDT is a neurotoxin, its target is to kill insects. But the industry says, don't worry. That's a patented process. Those chemicals will stay with the seed. They'll be locked into place, and these chemicals are called systemic chemicals. Yeah, they'll spread throughout the plant because we have to get it from the roots up to the top where the bad insects chew on the corn. It's got to get up there, and we want it to get throughout the whole length of the plant. We want it to kill the insects in the ground, and we want it to kill the worms that are eating the kernels of corn. But that's it. End of the growing season, back into the soil. Not a problem, right? Well, here's one example of a problem of what I call massacre in Portland. Day after these trees in Tigard, Oregon, in a shopping mall were sprayed with a neonicotinoid. They estimated 50,000 dead bees 24 hours later.
You want to do the tomato chipotle?
Here's the red corn seeds. I show these pictures because kids don't know what that dye means. And I also show it, you see that the eraser at the top on that pencil? That is there to remind me to tell you that this is a lethal dose of the neurotoxin for 50 to 100,000 bees. And this stuff, the neurotoxins, the neos, in Iowa only, because that's the only state that has released data, 370 times are used in 1 year. And this much, loose on the farm, will kill 50 to 100,000 bees. Here is the death rate of bees experimentally exposed to a neotoxin, and it shows that 10 parts per billion with a bee kills about 50% of the bees in a couple of days. 1 part per billion. You know what that is? I'll tell you. It's 1 inch, find it, 1 inch length and 16,000 miles. That's 1 part per billion. 1 inch and 16,000 miles. It takes 10 inches, if you will, and 16,000 miles. 10 parts per billion to kill 50% of the bees. That's potent. neurotoxin. And here is a bee on the anthers, the very top portion of a corn plant, gathering nectar and pollen. Bees are not pollinators for corn. That's accurate. But bees visit corn plants to gather the pollen, to take in nectar, bring it back to the hive to feed the babies. The neos, chemicals, are present in the pollen at concentrations that are slightly below to slightly higher than the lethal dose for a bee. So they're in the right range. Here's the pollen in the sac on the bee, soon to go back to the hive to contaminate the babies. That's the baby food, the larval stage of the bees. Now, I told you a Crop Life America is a lobbying organization for these chemical companies. Seed treatments reduce the potential exposure of pollinators and to other plants and animals, because the chemicals are locked to the seeds, like I showed you. But again, this year, American scientists demonstrated in the Midwest they can go to farmer fields and wait for a rainfall event, and these neurotoxins wash off the fields into ponds, lakes, whatever, adjoining the field, exposing other organisms, frogs, other beneficial insects that are found dead. Birds have been consuming these other dead insects, and then the songbirds. Very controversial at the moment, but there is a relationship that's being studied in the United States all the way over to the Netherlands, where they had used some neos until last year. Temporary banning here for 2 years, while scientists in Europe figure out a causal and effect relationship between those neos and pollinator deaths. EPA was asked to do the same thing, and they said, oh no, we're going to stay with our original decision. We're going to continue until the evidence is more clear. Well, the evidence is clear thanks to the work from Professor Lu at Harvard University. He calls these chemicals the new DDT because they persist in the environment, they're neurotoxins, and then they cause common causes. EPA didn't hear that, I'm sorry to say. What can you individually do about these neos is avoid green and blue. They're not for you. Those green and blue bottles that are available have insecticides, and the active ingredient in blue and green are the neos. Very few of us know that. Okay, I think I agreed to stop here and leave this pretty creature on the screen and ask to see if you have any questions. The reason why I'm going to stop here with this creature is 2 weeks ago we have found there's some good news. Good news. Center for Food Safety, Center for Biological Diversity, and an old retired professor who studied the monarch butterfly all his career have come together and prepared a legal document they presented to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife that says we want monarch butterfly put on the endangered species list, because now we've lost, in the last 17 years of the cropping, Roundup Ready spray, we've lost 90 to 95% of the population. And they said, remarkably, in their pending lawsuit, GMO Roundup Ready crops sprayed with glyphosate is the cause for the decline in the virus. So we'll see. We're all waiting to see how our federal government reacts to that request for listing. Otherwise, we're going to sue your pants off. Okay, question?
Has there been an increased incidence of neurological diseases in humans?
Yeah, good question. I'm not aware of that, but I'm also not aware of any other non-target studies that have been conducted with GMOs outside the insect world. I'm waiting. I have the same question as you. Of course, even in experimental animals, I want to see what doses do to mice, rats, frogs, and other innocent mice. No information. You could do that with chicken. Yeah.
I was struck when you said, when you were going through the reasons that the industry really adduces to why we should not pass a label. They said it would create shortages. I mean, it would create shortages. It seems to me that that's a confession that if we knew what we were eating, we would choose not to eat this stuff. I mean, wouldn't the shortages of non-GMO engineered crops be caused simply by the voluntary choice that we don't want them?
Fully 100% agree with what you just said.
Why would they admit to such a thing?
Ha! Well, why would Monsanto in the early 2000s admit to the Europeans that Monsanto thought that labeling their foods was a good idea? It's all about PR, it's all about perception, it's all about propaganda. And I've really grown to be a damn cynic in the last few years. You know, the more time I spend talking to people and traveling around and reading the literature on this, I'm going to tell you a story about me personally even now. The more what in the world is going on? Okay, I'm old enough to have been invited back to my alma mater's 50th anniversary to be one of the speakers at the event. And my mentor, bless her heart, is still alive in her 80s, set up the invite. She went in to talk to the dean about me and my presentation. And the first words, according to her, out of the dean's mouth, well, is he pro or con GMO? Pro or con? What the hell does that have to do with it? She said, he opened up the schedule book. Oh, I'm sorry, the facility is taken. And, you know, I hear these stories and I read about these discredited people. You know, I'm retired, so I'm not in their shoes. But, boy, this was a shock. It just came up a few days ago. Mentioning it now. Holy mackerel. What's the world coming to? I'm going to give a talk next week in all places, Jackson, Wyoming. They want to see my slides ahead of time. You know, like we're evil, wild, off our rocker people, or I don't know, what is this? What's going on, folks? This is, yeah, and you know, the other thing, just to follow on what Herb was just saying, the other side of that issue is, if it's so damn good, why don't they brag about it and slap a label on it and say, go for it, America? And I know, and you know, there are going to be people who don't care that'll only shop for the best bargain. That's the American way, freedom of choice. So if you have a daughter that's nursing a child, do you think your daughter would like to know if she's when she's consuming glyphosate? Right? And then there are others, like I just said. Does it matter? They're price conscious. And the alternative is not to put a label. The alternative is not just organic. It's conventional farming that'll get better and better and better, because our conventional farmers, they're no dummies, trust me, they'll see what the American people want. Cleaner food, or pure food, that's the trend. Organic, for example, has been up 10% a year for the last 10 years in terms of receipts. The fastest growing component of American agriculture is organic, and when we get enough of it, guess what? Prices will march up. That's the American way as well. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. I have 3 questions.
Okay.
So basically, I guess on 32 is just a vote for labeling, just straight up.
That is correct.
That's what it is. Nothing
Yes.
more, nothing less. Okay.
Correct.
And then,
It's very simple. Don't overcomplicate it.
yeah, not a big deal.
It happens in 64 countries. They don't even think about it. It's a fact.
Yeah, we fought over.
1997.
We fought over like homogenized milk. Everybody's fine with it. It's not a big deal.
Organic milk.
It's about money.
Yeah.
But the second question is, these are arguments that I heard on the internet when the big GMO thing was coming out with the voting. And there was a lot of offhanded beliefs out there. And one of them was, the chemical structure, if you break down the chemical in a strawberry, you know, it'll pretty much be the same thing. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
You bet I can, because I led the drive against that stupid, nonsensical, inaccurate propaganda. And many of the voters in this county got a large 5x7 postcard from the opposition in spring that showed strawberries being grown in somebody's yard. Did you know if you pass 15119, you will not be able to grow strawberries in your county? That's what you're referring to, right?
Yeah, and the structural breakdown, you know, it's the same thing.
What the deal is, it's technical. What is the definition of a genetically engineered plant? Fortunately, the folks, including the attorneys that wrote our ballot measure, included the terms using recombinant DNA technology. That means recombining back together DNAs from different sources. The strawberry has multiple chromosomal copies of its own chromosomes. It's not recombined with anything else. That's what has been done and developed over the years by the breeders of strawberries. It's larger, grow more fast, quickly, and be resistant, etc. So it's called polyploid, which means multiple sets of its own chromosomes. So the legislation, the 15119, wasn't even applicable to strawberries, asparagus, oh yeah, and marijuana. Can you imagine this day and age? Coming out with an advertisement that says, if you pass this legislation, you won't be able to grow marijuana in your county. I couldn't believe I was hearing that.
Third question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then I'm done. Okay, another argument that was an offhanded one too, that didn't make any sense. Farmers are gonna lose their local money, you know, like keep it local. Then we'll get rid of the smaller farmers if we do this GMO thing. That was another one that I kept hearing.
Would you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I phrased it a little bit weird. Comments that I heard on Facebook are local farmers will lose money if we use GMO because then they'll be
Don't use GMO.
yeah.
If local farmers do not use GMO, they'll lose money.
Yeah, basically because they're gonna have to pay more, or I forget what the argument was, but it sounded funny and it didn't have any backup to it.
Yeah.
But I kept hearing it.
I don't remember that particular aspect, but I'll talk about it. The question was, one of the opposing arguments to the ballot measure in the spring was, if we pass it, no one in the county will be able to grow GMO crops. Yes, that's true. That's what it's all about. But our farmers will suffer financially because of that. And it's just the opposite. The feedback, well, let me tell you, you know probably more about the Senate politics. Two people that are running for first-time election to county commissioners in Jackson County. I heard that the first sentence out of both of their mouths was something to the effect, hallelujah, no GMOs. We are going to go on a platform where we will take financial advantage of that and bring more money into the county. And you know, I couldn't believe that somebody sent this to us. I don't read the New York Times. About 2 weeks ago, there was an article in the New York Times, 3,000 miles away, about Ashland, Oregon. Population, it says 20,000. It attracts 300,000 tourists a year to this community. And the keynote portion of that article was the upwelling, if you will, of restaurants that will be serving cutting-edge organic cuisine. How's that, folks, to be, you know, an Ashland? Yep. And how is it, do you know, that in this precinct here in Ashland, on that spring vote, it was 87% in favor of 15-119. When I saw that, I asked, can this be right? Wow, what a community to live in my opinion.
One more question, because what you just said. I heard something about it went through, but then it got brought down, even though we got voted for it, or am I misunderstanding?
No. Definitely not. It won't take effect probably until, I think it's next June. There is a grace period for those farmers that are currently growing GMO crops to do the last harvest. And it can't take effect until 12 months after the vote was certified.
So we did get it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that would be next June.
Well, Ray, I want to thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What we're going to do is post this video on our website so a lot more people can
Oh, poor Linda.
learn from you.
Around.
I know you just published an article that we can read online. Would you tell people about that?
How do you know about that?
Because
Did mention it?
I got something on the email.
Oh my
Why
God.
don't you tell people?
I have some hard copies
People
of
are
it.
behind the screen. Thank you for your forbearance, but I hope you learned something about genetically modified crops and what they're doing to our environment.
Does this include your bio?
Huh?
Pardon me?
Good. You'll have a chance to-
I don't have that with me now. This is a paper that just came out on Monday. It's all about pesticide use. That's why you got a good dose of information about pesticides today. Of course, it's available online.
Well,
but
a
you
great
have
deal of money
hard
into
copy.
feed.
So one last question. I saw that corporations are doing a lot of money, kind of like we saw on the 1519 vote, $1.8 million is quoted. Do you see Oregon leading the way and the corporations seeing that and trying to infuse money here to stop the politics? And if that is happening, like how much do you expect to see in these next coming weeks? And what other states are leading the way along with Oregon?
Yeah, well, you know that Colorado has the same kind of vote that we do. There's a technical issue that I see. Your ballot is a little bit different than ours being better. We specify a level of contamination that would trigger a label, and they don't have that. It's really interesting. Their rules in Colorado, although it's an initiative state, just like Oregon, if they or when they pass their labeling in Colorado in November, it's got to go through extensive discussions and further legislation in their state capital. Ours doesn't have to go through that business. So bottom line, we specify a trigger level. We got 0.9%, which is a very common level of contamination that triggers the labeling in Europe, for example. And in South Korea, I think Japan is higher. There are others, and they try to follow those rules. So to try to answer your question, I hate to sound like a broken record. Those of you that heard me talk in the spring, when the eyes were upon this county, the eyes are upon this state. and yes, on Colorado. Right now, Oregon could become the first state in the union to have a labeling rule based upon an initiative and vote of the people. Vermont, which does now, was passed by their legislature, so that's different. And there's, I always forget, Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, there's like 3 other states in New England that are waiting for a 4th and a 5th state that touches their state to enact labeling. So we don't know when that'll come. But the freestanding, popular vote, Oregon could be the first one in the nation. And yes, it gets the attention of the people that would not like to see it. For sure.
Well, we need to make that happen. There are other issues on that ballot.